This program is made possible by the loyal financial support of the friends and partners of Family Policy Institute.
You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world.
Good evening and welcome to Salt and Light. We're on the university campus of Stellenbosch, and I'm sitting with a group of students here to discuss the current protests on the university campuses of South Africa. My co-host is Pastor Fred May of the Shofar family of churches, and what we want to do is just speak to university students and get their insight and their views on what is happening currently in our country. So, Pastor Fred, thank you for joining us and for co-hosting this segment with me.
It's a pleasure. It's really good to be here today.
So this is a serious topic, and a lot of people are asking questions about what is happening around the country, especially with regard to the protests on, well, it's 7 campuses at the moment. And what people are concerned about is that the 7 campuses or the protest is about various issues, different issues. It's not one issue. So previously we had the fees must fall issue, and a number of campuses got behind that. But now we have protest flare-ups, for example, on the University of Cape Town, where it's about student accommodation. And then we have protests on Mahikeng campus in Northwest, and they burned down the Science Center and the library, and that was because the SRC was dissolved. And then in the University of Pretoria, it's about a language policy. So it's different issues, but the protest is growing and it's becoming increasingly violent. So, Pastor Fred, one of the things I wanted to ask you, because you've been involved with campus life for such a long time, working with students, what is your take on this?
Well, I think it's an evolving situation. We're all watching and trying to make sense of it. I think all of us have ideas about it. But the one thing that is clear is, in this case, just the timing and the nature of the issue surfacing. And it's an election year. And one has to keep that in mind, and if there is in fact a connection, then it's a very disquieting thing to have to deal with and to consider. But we trust that our young people will get their heads around the dynamics and the challenges and the implications. And I think every generation has to deal with its own issues, and this one will do the same. God helping us.
Now, I'm glad you raised that issue, because we were at the opening of Parliament on the 11th of February. And I think most of you must have seen on television the antics of the EFF and the ANC fighting each other, shouting at each other, spilling out onto the courtyards of Parliament. It's concerning a lot of Christians. How many of you would agree that what is happening in our country today, especially on the university campuses, is a spillover of what is happening in Parliament? Anybody wants to give some insight on that?
We just have to look at our own student parliament to see how the parliament, national parliament, it does have an influence. We do look up to our leaders as to how they act, how they react to certain things. And I think we are the generation who's actually making a stand as to disagreeing to many things that people have just been silent about. So yes, it is a reflection of what's happening
in Parliament.
In Parliament.
Yeah, being in a leadership structure for 3 years now, I've realized that a spirit is caught, not taught, and a spirit that rises up in a leadership will eventually be in the followers as well. And if disorderliness and incorrect conduct is exemplified within a Parliament setup, that will trickle down to the followers as well. And yeah, that's just my take on it.
Okay, so any of you think that because it's an election year, as Pastor Fred correctly said, we are having our local government election this year, not sure of the date yet, but it is, and parties are electioneering already. not overtly, but they are. So do you think what is happening on our campuses is instigated by political forces to get their messages across and using students to make their point?
I do think it's a very easy answer, and the answer is yes. Of course, these movements have been taken over. We've seen it with Fees Must Fall last year, where certain political parties came in and just took over the leadership of all of these organizations, and where currently it was still under the mandate of a cause back then, but currently it's clearly political, and the cause is clearly political in that regard as well. And you can see the mobilization taking place is not around a cause anymore, but it's more around the agenda and more around a political cause in that regard. So I don't think you can argue in that regard that it's not a political cause anymore.
Something that I'm just wanting to know if you're aware of it on campus, but there's a growing frequency of seemingly political assassinations within the ranks of the ruling party with people who serve on excos at local government level. Is there any knowledge of that on campus? Do you have knowledge of it? It's at the moment it's as many as one per month. Professional strikes through the head, driveway of the home, in the home, by a group of 4 to 5 professional assassins. It's been going on for a while now. So do you have any knowledge of that?
I think in where I'm from in KZN, it's always hear the rumors, oh, he was taken out, or you hear of mayors' houses being stoned because they dropped the ball on something, or they said something that seemed out of place in the higher echelons of management. So, I mean, you hear the rumors, but to hear that it's fact is a little bit even more disconcerting, is alarming, I would say. I don't know if the majority of students on campus know about it, but I think that's maybe something that needs to be brought to our attention.
So yeah, and any of you want to just generally comment on, the fact that students are being used as political footballs?
Yeah, what I want to say on that is that I think young people as a general are hungry for purpose and to have something to fight for. And now you have these outside parties holding up this purpose and this fight as a sort of ideal. If you fight for this, if you get involved in this, this is going to be an outcome. So we see this, sort of in a utopia is sketched and people want to fight for that, but it's the wrong fight. It's not the fight that we've been called to fight. So yeah.
I think also it's an identity issue. I think being between 18 and 24, people are still at a part of their life where they're trying to find out who they are, and I think it's scary to think that a lot of people are identifying themselves with a cause that they don't truly believe in, and I think identity plays a big part, and especially when you're talking about university, it's a place where you grow and develop yourself and start building what you want to achieve for your life and for your future. And I fear that that's being taken away from a lot of students, and they actually don't understand even the psychological aspects or emotions they are going through at that age. They're not being made aware of that, and that's also being used for other people's advantage and at the expense of their identity.
Also, just to add on to what Xolile said, it's almost like students have to or feel like they're wearing certain masks the whole time. So at this situation with this group of people, I have to be this sort of way. With these sort of people, I have to be that sort of way. And then you have a situation where young people just really don't know who they are, and they're really just trying to just attach themselves to anything that's sort of substance that they feel like is fighting their cause or fighting for their beliefs or anything like that. And it's so easy to then obviously put yourself to something that seems a bit, radical and out there and alternative because it's the cool thing of the day, and it's sort of like, in a way, like a trend. Like, okay, I'm part of this group, it seems trendy, it's in the news, everyone's talking about it, so I want to be a part of it. So now students are just finding that whole thing of just like, okay, maybe I'm going to just attach my identity to that now.
Okay, so I did some research on what happened at University of Cape Town, and what I discovered was that somebody started this whole argument about the accommodation, the residences at UCT, and that most of it is going to white people. And they whipped up a lot of emotions, and people got excited about that. They built a shack outside UCT. Then it got violent. They ran into some of the buildings, ripped off priceless paintings, burnt it, trashed a lot of the facilities, but again, emotion. And later turns out the Vice Chancellor, Max Price, released a statement saying that the University of Cape Town has 27,000 students registered there, but they only have 6,600 beds. So they can only accommodate 6,600 students. That's all they have of the 27,000. But of the 6,600 beds they have, more than 75% is black students. More than 75%. So it's a lie that it's mostly going to white people. It's more than 75% of black people that have the accommodation. But somebody just whipped up a number and shouted that this is the problem, it's all going to white people, and so people get excited and they cause damage, and then later find out it's actually not true. Are you seeing that perhaps on this campus or other campuses, that people are just using students to create mayhem?
Well, on this campus, we know that recently we had the purple face incident. And it was a black and white photo. And if it's a black and white photo, you don't know whether or not it was a black, it was black paint that somebody used, or if it was any other color. So just like the UCT incident, somebody just says somebody has gone in blackfaced, and then everything goes out of proportion. And it's only because race is such a raw issue in South Africa. And if you pull that card, everybody is going to go up in arms. And it's a little unfortunate, as students, and you're studying and you think we would think about the things that we're going to do, but with a topic like that and a topic like race, it goes straight to the heart of many of the students. So there's no time to think. There's no time to think whether or not the rumors are true, or if this person is, giving valid information. So people just go off on whatever is given to them. So, yeah.
People know that race is an emotive issue in South Africa. Use the race card, you're guaranteed to get a response.
I know with the whole purple face incident, it's almost like if I'm offended about something in my heart, and if it's an issue for me personally, like let's say I think I'm ugly and then somebody looks at me funny, maybe they just smelled something bad and they pulled a face, but automatically I'm going to almost like take it as if, you see, they're doing that because I'm ugly. And like in psychology, it's this thing called, I think, cognitive behavioral theory, where if you believe a negative thought, you would almost confirm your suspicions or make your situation sort of shape in order to confirm that about you. And I think what really the issue is just, I'm saying bluntly, but it's like a lack of Jesus and a lack of healing that needs to take place. And I think as a student last year, when all these protests were happening, I was quite like almost annoyed with the church. Like, oh, why aren't they actually getting involved? Like, the issue isn't salvation here. The issue is fees. It's this. It's an injustice. And when actually the issue, almost like the answer still was God. Because if you think about it, if I come to salvation, I automatically fall under the identity of Christ. So before I'm an Indian, I am a child of God. And think since I've come to salvation properly, like almost I don't even notice any racist slurs around me because I know who I belong to and I know who I am. So
people are actually surprised that the church hasn't got more involved in what is happening on our campuses. I've just read in the news media that the Nelson Mandela Foundation and some other organizations have offered to mediate between the university and the students to try to bring about peace, but strangely absent is the church. So people are concerned about that. Maybe if you could comment on that.
I think what's catching a lot of institutions, people, even the corporate world off guard is the rapid pace at which things move. I mean, just by way of introduction, you were just highlighting several issues, and it's hard to know which came first and which is offsetting which. It seems to be overtaking each other at the moment. And I think our challenge is just to play catch up in so many ways. I think at this stage our greatest challenge is to try to make sense of it from a Christian biblical perspective. In defense of the church in general, I think that socially we're undergoing a massive sociological, political, psychological sea change. So much is shifting. It's like we're all on shifting sand, and on the inside we're like wobbling around like jelly, not quite knowing where we're at emotionally, and we all want to pin our emotions some way. But it's very hard. So Errol, to answer your question, no, we cannot respond yet. At the moment, I'm trying to reconvene a meeting with church leaders in this town so we can just decide about whether we should be involved at all or not. I mean, I've just learned that the church leaders felt that we've got a separation of church and state issue here, so the church shouldn't be involved. Well, when our representative came back from the meeting, I was pretty outraged, so I'm trying to reconvene a meeting, and I'm lobbying other church members first, and we're going to gang tackle the rest. but it's emotional, and I think, you know, when I go into that meeting, I've got to really make sure that my temperature is down, because I've got to be respectful, and I think that's all of our challenge, is to learn to be respectful of each other. And that's where the church can lead the way, not in terms of what we do, but in terms of how we do it. Because I don't think any of us can claim to have everything worked out or the answers perfectly. And I understand that church members have this daddy must fix everything, know everything relationship with us, which is understandable, but it's not tenable. It's not quite attainable yet, but we need to catch up.
We need to catch up.
Yeah.
I think I want to just get from insight from you. How many of you agree that the church shouldn't get involved in this? But before I allow you to answer, we have to go for a break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about should the church get involved on the campuses today. Welcome back to the program. I'm speaking to a group of students here on the campus of Stellenbosch University, and we're talking about the chaos on the campuses of South Africa. Co-hosting the show with me is Pastor Fred May of the Shofar family of churches. Now, we talked about, or Pastor Fred talked about, you know, the involvement of the church on the campuses while all of these things are happening. How many of you agree that the church shouldn't get involved, and how many of you would say they should be getting involved?
I think that they should be involved.
Why?
Well, because justice comes from God, so you can't be church and not stand for justice. In fact, you cease to be a church. Immediately, you do not stand for justice. And anyone that does not stand for justice, then you're on the other side of the revolution.
Okay.
So
that makes
then
sense.
you against justice. And I think too, because there is so much damage that has been done by what I refer to as apartheid theology, which unless and until the church stands for, I won't say take responsibility, but then at least undo the apartheid theology, move into the liberation theology, which is what Jesus Christ has been and is on about. Because you cannot talk about having life in abundance without talking about the economic crisis. What is abundant about staying in a shack? There's no abundance in that. So unless and until then the church is comfortable to take ownership of such and then help the people to understand what it means to have life, because really apartheid theology has made black people to be content in uncomfortable environments. So I therefore think that the church has to be involved, and it's scriptural, and there's evidence that the church has to stand for justice. And because there is so much injustice that has been done by the apartheid theology, I won't say the church.
I think the church should get involved, but maybe not in the conventional sense of like, okay, I know maybe we all call it different things. So I know James and Diamond are in the SRC, so their role perhaps is different. Oh, I'm so sorry. Anyway, but I think that like, I know Fred had like Pastor Fred, sorry, had a sermon about that, about like the zealots thing. And the thing is the church should be involved, but perhaps like not in the conventional sense of, not going to be like joining a protest and in terms of like, you know, like burning stuff or, you know, stuff like that. I think, you know, people think praying is kind of staying silent or being ineffective, but I think it's very effective. If I'm praying for God's kingdom to come, I know that if I'm praying for my leaders, I know that if they really were godly leaders, like born again, spirit-full Christians, like it wouldn't be witnessing to their spirit to like, to sort of cheat people out of money and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Michaela, I would agree with you that we've got to be involved, but I mean, there's much to be said in terms of what does that mean. There'd be a lot of fights about how far, how much, and mostly in which way. My questions aren't any of those. My question is to which end. And for me, there are two issues that are important in terms of, one is our unity. And first, it's a theological, philosophical unity. these are wonderful times for conversation among believers as to who is Jesus Christ, why did he come, and what does he want to see happen when he comes back. And is his mandate dictated to by what happens and doesn't happen around us in the long term? I think these are important discussions for us to have. And how important is our unity, our convergence towards some point of agreement, to whatever extent. How important is that to him and how important is that to us? I think that's very important. And for me, I think these are wonderful times for us to really get to know each other a little bit better. And as I said early on, for me, it's important that we do that respectfully. The thing that concerns me the most at the moment in South Africa is that we're degenerating into a typical third world poverty mentality situation in terms of just a lack of disrespect all around. And we mentioned in Parliament the other day. I mean, what's happening in the in the echelons of power is, by any level, completely unacceptable. And it doesn't matter how justified your cause is, the descent into violence, into threat of violence is unacceptable. And for us as a church, we need to talk about that. We need to talk about how Marxist are we and how Christians are we. When do we begin to say to each other that the end justifies the means? These are very important questions. And to my mind, I think it's important that we just keep the history of Africa in mind. It's not too long ago that we've come out of a Rwanda situation where Christians were involved. And there was a lack of conversation around these issues in the build-up to the massive explosion. In the aftermath of that, millions of people are dead and the church is quiet and all the warmongers are gone and there's not even a population left to ask the questions. We still have an opportunity to ask the questions. I think it's very important that we engage each other on these things, but respectfully. So, you know, as I said before, I have very strong views on the situation, but I cannot have any sense of finality when I'm dealing with my brothers. There's got to be a respectful, meaningful engagement.
And that's why we need to have these discussions. And that's why I invited students like you from different backgrounds, different areas in South Africa. You all come from different cities and towns, different families. But I think a lot of you understand what is good for South Africa. The lady over there raised the issue of the economy. And one of the questions I want to ask you as students, I know you're busy with your studies here, you know, and your parents is perhaps paying for your studies, but in your understanding, what do you think is undermining our economy? What are the forces that's undermining our economy? And you've heard from the Minister of Finance that, you know, we're trying to avoid being downgraded to junk status as a nation. And our growth has been 0.6%. And so that the implications for all of us as South Africans are dire. But what brought us to this place?
I think what brought us to this place are questions that are not asked. Number one would have to be, where is the money going? For instance, people are talking about fees must fall. You know, there is a ground for those things to happen, but where is the money going? And so the issues that should be discussed are not primarily, you know, fees must fall and all those people that are hungry out there. I think the questions that should be asked are, where is the money going? The issues that should be faced are corruption, you know, because South Africa has got a lot of money. The budget is over R1 trillion. And a lot of things are not being attended to. And so those things should be questions like, where is the money going? We need to look at corruption. Then we look at the people that are hungry. We need to look at where's the money going. Then we look at fees must fall.
If I can just come in there now, the Fees Must Fall campaign, you know, people ask, but can South Africa afford to give students free education? And the very simple answer to that is no, it can't. Just can't. Because nothing is free. Somebody has to pay for it. And if students are not paying for their fees, then obviously the taxpayer has to pay for that. Is South Africa in the economic space to be able to do something like that? The answer is no. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I was in Parliament and the Auditor General made a report. And one of his reports, he said that of all government departments, 36 billion rand was misspent. 36 billion rand went missing. He called it fruitless and wasteful expenditure. That means 36,000 million rand disappeared and nobody knows what it was spent on. This is by government departments. What do you think we could have done with 36,000 million rand for the poor, for education, if it wasn't thrown away by our government?
Sorry. My contribution, I would have loved to ask a question actually. First, by whose measures are we not able to afford fees? Who decided that we cannot afford? A question perhaps that you may wish to respond to. However, if I were to argue against such, we are able to. As a matter of fact, from 1994, we could have. The reason that 1994, because we had an agreement, CODESA, 1994, that was supposed to mark a whole lot of things to be done the other way. That is restoration. There were 3 R's that there was an agreement upon with the CODESA. The restoration, reconciliation, and redistribution. Now, all that speaks to restoring the dignity of black people. And you cannot talk about the dignity of black people without education. And 2, it's not even to say that we had money from 94. We already had money even prior 94. It is unfortunate that because of apartheid regime, some were benefiting, some were not. And what the democracy has done is that we have 2 coexisting. We have Zimbabwe and Europe at the same time. So money we do have. We are producing the most wealth that is supplying the Western countries, that is supplying all kinds of investors. In fact, Lonmin alone can fund all students. Lonmin alone can fund all students. But Lonmin is not able to fund his own employees. So that speaks to the injustice, that speaks to the oppression, and not necessarily that we don't afford. We've got more than enough to afford. And the question is, where is our interest? And our interest lies in making the rich richer and making the poor poorer. That is why we cannot afford. It's a lie to say we cannot afford. We can. That's why there was an agreement that the state, this is 1994 CODESA, that the state would intervene to make access to institutions of higher learning. It was because they knew that it could be done. It's not even like this concept came with students. It's not a new thing. We are calling on what has been agreed upon 21 years ago. So it's not a new conversation. How was it going to be practical? You were supposed to discuss that in 1994. You knew it was practical. As a matter of fact, we see the wealth, but some are spectators while others are enjoying. And that's the injustice we're talking about. It is not fair, and it cannot be fair. Because within this institution, you have people that can pay their fees up front for the entire program, make it 4 years degree. They can pay for it January. Yet you have those who cannot even afford their food. So that speaks to the injustice that we're talking about. So to say that it's not practical, it's a lie.
So basically what we're talking about is how money is used, where money is going, how it is apportioned in this country. So it's not getting to where it needs to get. The important things like health and education and all of those things. And a number of people are getting obscenely wealthy in this country from the resources of the nation. And I think that is what the debate is. You wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think if you look at Judges and even Isaiah, Malachi and so on, you can see very clearly that when a leader follows God, the nation follows God. And when a leader follows God, he gives everything to God. He makes sure that everything is about God. He's not building idols and temples for himself and making the people do unnecessary things. He's not inflicting on the people unnecessary pain and unrighteousness. And I think that actually is where it all stems from, is that we've had leaders for longer than most would like to admit. I think even I would say before 1994, in fact, probably 1920, even further back, we've had leaders serving the god of money, the god of themselves and the god of greed. And that, I think, is where it stems from. That's where corruption stems from. That is, I think, even where problems with capitalism stem from, is that greed. And that comes from not serving God.
Okay, so I want to bring us back to our topic. It is the current chaos, protests, frustrations on the university campuses of South Africa. Obviously, this has dire implications for the nation because the future of our nation is on the university campuses today. And what kind of nation we're going to be in 10, 20 years' time depend on the kind of education you guys are getting on the campuses now. And so we have political forces at play, we have all kinds of things happening. And of course, this issue that we're talking about, economy. The economy is a huge thing when it comes to education, because we need to fund the education, the quality of the education, how many people can be educated. As the lady said, some people can afford the education, others need help. And we need to help those people to making sure that all our people get a good education.
It's interesting how the root of everything stems from two extremes that Jesus mentioned in Matthew 6. He said you will either love God or hate mammon, or love the one and hate the other. You cannot serve both masters. And it's interesting how every motivation I've seen through my life, every agenda would either speak of come from some kind of worldview. When Jesus said, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these other things you think about or worry about will be added unto you. And it comes from a certain worldview or experience, or someone called it someone's socio intercultural location. And it's very interesting in that regard. And also Pastor Fred had a sermon once on human agenda and divine agenda. And it really made me think, how do we reconcile the two to bring about a solution in our modern day context? How can we see each other as human beings and not as race or culture? Yes, we acknowledge that, but how can we approach one another? And there's one Dr. Mark Chorona who said something very interesting. He said, it is the time where we seek not leaders who serve, but servants who lead. It is from the inclination of one's heart that one is a servant, and from that we lead. And it's just that mindset that in leadership, I think, would bring something very interesting.
That servant leadership was demonstrated by Jesus. He was the ultimate servant leader, and for Christians in churches, wherever we find ourselves, that's our standard. We're going to go for a break, and when we come back, we want to talk about solutions. So we know what the problem is. The political movements and the forces on the university campuses, a lot of it using students to whip up emotions and all of that. Then we've got the economic issues that we have to acknowledge and face up to. That South Africa is in a very precarious position at the moment economically. And we can debate the reasons for that for hours, but the reality is we are there, and it affects you guys on the campuses and students that need to be educated and younger people that's going to be entering into the universities. So we want to speak to you about what do you think are the solutions? What does South Africa need to do? What does our government need to do? What does the church need to do to bring about this place that will bring peace and healing and reconciliation, and of course improve our economy and everything else, the relationships between the various race groups in South Africa. We've been trying to do that for a long time. It looks like in the Nelson Mandela era, we got somewhere, and now we appear to be going a little bit back. So more after the break with the students from Stellenbosch University. We've been having a great discussion so far, talking about the protest action on various campuses around South Africa, and then also we talked briefly about the economic issues and the political issues in our country. But in this segment, I want to talk about solutions, and I want to get insight from you as students. What do you believe should be happening in South Africa to bring about reconciliation and healing and peace and all of the good things that will build a prosperous, healthy and stable society? Anybody want to go? Actually,
I think the first and foremost that everyone needs to realize is their responsibility to develop South Africa. White, black, colored, Indian, every citizen in South Africa needs to realize their responsibility. And we also need leadership and accountability, in the sense that we need authentic leaders who are concerned to address the needs of the people, and authentic in the sense that they're honest with themselves, and also seek to develop South Africa to be a developed country, equipping and trying to correct the injustice of the past by working towards a vision and ideal that will ensure that everyone in the society of South Africa has equal opportunity, has access to education, and also has a place to live, we work towards, and even as a citizen of South Africa, you know your responsibility. Whether you are in a different class, you know that you have a responsibility to serve for the benefit of your better South Africans. So I think there needs to be that paradigm shift for the people of South Africa to realize that in order for South Africa to actually change.
Yeah, and you know, our future is a shared future. Somebody said it this way: if we don't have a shared future, we don't have a future at all. And all South Africans must understand that we're all in this boat together, this boat called South Africa. And we all have to work together with each other to build this nation and get to where we want to be. But one is not going to do it without the other. And I think actually he made a very critical point there. It depends on leadership. And we need good, strong, godly leadership in this nation if we're going to get to where we need to be.
I think also as a church, we need to liberate ourselves from this artificial peace talk, and be willing to go through the uncomfortable conversation. And especially because there's evidence in the scriptures where the Lord has sent people for such. Now, once we move from this artificial peace, where the only time we come in as mediators between students and the officials that stop this fight, we need to move away from that. Because political violence is interpreted. Once a building burns, it burns because something has burned from inside. Now you see it from the out. If you're gonna deal with that building burning and you don't deal with the hurt inside, you have not solved the problem. And what the church tends to do is to deal with the building that is burning. Now that's what has led the country to where it is now. That the 1994 marked this having to have this nation building. Nelson Mandela's period, you know, there's nothing wrong with nation building, because whether we like it or not, we're gonna be with black and white in heaven forever, eternity, and eternity is very long. We might as well learn to live together now. So there's nothing wrong with having a nation to be at peace, but you cannot expect people to be at peace when there's actually no peace. And what do I mean by that? Like in the practical sense and in what is happening in our campuses now. You have a situation in an environment where students, which are the people that are supposed to bring hope and solutions to the society, being deprived the actual education. Say, for instance, I come to university and I don't have enough money to study. Now I get to class, but I need to go back to work. When do I learn? At what point do I study? And another one goes to class, go back home, get all the access, everything that assists him or her in terms of the academic. Now you have a situation where one passes much more, the other one fails, and they drop out. That's why you have high levels of black dropouts, because you find an environment that is not conducive to learning. And it's not because people don't want to learn. So that is why now you have all this conversation about fees must fall, decolonize, because it has to be accessible to all.
What is your name? Tobisa. The burning building, are you happy with the burning building in terms of the message that it sends?
Well, it's quite uncomfortable to say, am I happy, as if it's something that should be happening.
Is it a good thing?
It's not supposed to be happening.
It's a necessary thing. I just want that clarified.
No, the thing is now, the way you're phrasing the question, it's as though it's the standard. It's not the standard. It speaks more to what is happening. So then the question would be, am I pleased with the fact that students are angry? Definitely not.
I'm not talking about the student, I'm talking about the building.
Yes.
I'm talking about the building.
Yes.
If somebody in the building should be a fatality, does it still carry the same message?
That is the point I'm making. Now we are addressing the building, yet the building is a tactic. We cannot reduce it to the building, because then it invalidates the pain with the students. We cannot talk about the building as though it's just merely the building burning. It's not. What is causing the building to burn?
We are looking at Africa where there are precious few buildings left because of my question that is not being answered. So in the end,
you're not asking it right. That's the hope, and it's not going to be answered.
Okay, let me put it this way.
It won't be answered at all unless you deal with the core thing. Because the reason why it's not answered is because the churches are doing exactly that. You are concerned about the building.
It's not what the churches are doing. It's what the rest of the world is doing.
Yes.
The whole world is asking questions about Africa, not just in South Africa. It's all over Africa. It's in the Congo. It's in Rwanda. It's everywhere.
Yes.
And it's something that we need to clarify in our own minds.
Can I maybe ask the question this way? Maybe somebody else wants to ask her. Does a burning building justify the pain of the student? So the person feels pain, and so we burn a building. Is that justified? Can we justify that? And we want to deal with those issues. The question is, how do we deal? And we're talking about solutions here. So, for example, if everybody felt justified, look, I have a problem, I didn't get this, whatever, so I'm going to go harm somebody or break something down, what happens to the entire nation? Because one of the things, I started a campaign, for example, called South Africa Must Rise. And I call that SA Must Rise because I said we as a nation together must rise above our circumstances, and we have to work together to do that. And I said, all these campaigns, fees must fall, this must fall, Zuma must fall, everything must fall. Eventually our entire nation is going to fall, because everything has to fall. And perhaps maybe we shouldn't talk about everything falling, maybe we should talk about building the nation rising above our circumstances, working together, talking to each other. Sir?
At the end of the day, I think what's the main issue is people are carrying hurt from the past, people are carrying hurt from their current situation, people are carrying hurt from the fact that they don't get services, or like they don't feel like they have a basic chance in life. Or on the other side, people are hurt because they think that everything's being taken away from them. So there's hurt, there's a lot of ill feeling that's in each and every person. And the thing is, as a church, and there's a song actually by Elevation Worship that I sort of discovered now that says that we can't just wait for a move of God, that we are the move of God. So us as the church, and that's what I sort of ask myself, like sometimes I think one can get too intimidated by being like, what must happen to this country for it to be solved? And maybe ask the question of, what can I do? What can I as a young Christian man, a young Christian woman do in order to make this country better? Because obviously I have my ministry field. I have 25,000 students in Stellenbosch. So what can I do to make it better for the other 25,000 students? And the thing is, you then have to, the people that you sort of come into contact with, you have to carry the message of Christ. And that's the first thing. The second thing is we deal with things that are really hurting people. We deal with identity issues. We deal with issues of just people not understanding who they are at the end of the day, because that's a lot of what's happening here. It's just being like, trying to sort of attach their identity to a cause instead of attaching identity to Christ, because obviously we are children of God. So once people sort of renew their minds to that, and that's what transformation is at the end of the day. It's a renewal of the mind, and doesn't take obviously one day, and it doesn't take one action. It takes a constant meditating on the fact that, at the end of the day, this is my identity and I have to walk in that. So it is dealing with people sort of man to man, or just sitting down and really just going through that process with a person and just being like, yes, obviously the macro and the socioeconomic issues must be dealt with as well. We're not saying that like the church must just sort of stay idle and not talk about these things. And it's really important. And I know there are churches around here that are talking about these issues, and that's great. It's also realizing that the people that are, let's say, burning buildings or protesting or whatever the situation is, or fighting, the people are carrying hurt and baggage, and we have to deal with that. And the only way we can deal with that is with the Word. The Word has brought us to where we are today from the bad situation that we were in previously, and the Word is what gives us hope for a better future. So that's what we have to move with at the end of the day.
I just want to come back to this question because it's an important one to me. And maybe you weren't here when we started the conversation, but my fear for South Africa, for where it is now, and maybe you're not aware of it, but there's a genocide watch, and there's a scale, and for 10 years now, South Africa's been one mark from full genocide scale. As far as the genocide watchers around the world are concerned, they've been watching South Africa, and they still are, and more so now, because our situation is a lot more volatile, and it's not just on campuses. It's been like that for a while. There are undercurrents that are scary. And for me, as Christians, I think there are two issues. There are the systemic structural issues of injustice that are massive. And that is not our problem, it's your problem. Your generation is going to have to deal with it. That's why it's important that we have this conversation. We're not going to be around to deal with it. You're going to have to live with whatever choices you make right now. So that's why the other question, the one that goes alongside, what happens inside of us? And the conversation was what we must have, and locking into what he's saying, is my anger, my pain, all the residual stuff that I bring with me from generations back. How do I mediate that? What is justified and what is justifiable? What is destructive and what is constructive? And what I feel we can do immediately, and it's not a cool thing to do, but it's the right thing to do, is we need to tone down the rhetoric, the racialistic, the radical, the revolutionary. And I just want to say that I'm comfortable with hearing about a revolution. Christians aren't involved in revolutions. Revolutions mean genocide. There's no way on earth that revolution has been executed without the killing and the destroying of millions of people and economies. And in South Africa, we cannot afford that. As Christians, we must go in there and we must isolate the pain from this unreasonable rage. This animal, if we let this animal out of the cage, none of us will be left. And that's all I'm wanting to say. So it's great to have radical rhetoric, but it's important that we understand that our calling is to be responsible. We've got to tone it down so we don't speak at each other. And what makes South Africa dangerous now is that we are objectifying entire groups. It's what happened in Germany before the Holocaust. It's happening with white people, it's happening with people who aren't following the main narrative, the dominant narrative. And we need to climb in there. That's my biggest concern with campus. I'm not seeing young people standing up, reasonable people who think about 10 years from now, are we going to have a campus at all? I'm not hearing that. I'm hearing a lot of hot-headed nonsense by short-sighted, unthinking people. And that concerns me as a dad, as a father, as somebody who was there in '76 when my friends were being shot around me. We were in a real war situation. We went into microaggression nonsense like you guys are now. There was real violence. There was a real army on campus. And right now, I would like to see young people sober up and think about tomorrow.
Yeah, Pastor Fred, I do agree. We've actually had a discussion the other day, myself and Akolile and our team, about rhetoric and how, because I do my master's in Pauline studies, and I realized how Paul, he was an imperial strategist, how he used the rhetoric of the time to unify the church, the Jews and the Gentiles. And in the same way, words makes us do things, and it influences us the most. If I say you're this, your attitude might change towards me. If I say you're that, your attitude might change towards me. And I understand, like Pastor Fred, that we need some kind of a deconstructing rhetoric that will deconstruct the spaces that have informed our consciousness. This space informs our consciousness now racially, discriminatory, and we need a new rhetoric that can it's not going to be easy, but it's going to take a lot of time to do so. But we need young people to start that process of deconstruction.
I think there's a few things, I think 3 things that I want to mention is, if we look at our homes, because it starts at, like, even when you look at the church is built on the homes, you know, the families. It's a bit different when you're a student and you attend church, but so look at the home, the parents guiding, how's that structure working? Because that is where nurturing takes place, that is where guidance takes place, and what kind of guidance have we been receiving? What kind of messages have we been subliminally and subconsciously been receiving from our parents? And then the other point that I want to mention is, I don't think as young people we realize the amount of work that we actually have to put in, and the kind of attitude that we need. We need to work hard. I mean, if I have to look, I had a conversation with my dad on Sunday evening, and we were speaking about motivation, and his motivation was to get out of poverty, and that drove him to where he is today. And I was like, okay, but looking around me, what kind of motivation is there that I can really hold on to? Because I don't have apartheid. My reality is different. And he explained to me how he had to work, and after that he studied for 3-4 hours? And are our young people that has to maybe go through that struggle, are we willing to go through that today? Because maybe our parents weren't able to do it, so now we have that mandate. Are we willing to go to those extremities and decide, listen here, I have to work hard because changing my family's narrative, it rests upon me. And I don't think we want to maybe admit to how hard it is that we want to work, because we're born free. We're supposed to be handed everything now.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no,
So it's,
that is this generation is soft. I had 2 jobs, and I was in ministry, and I was a student. I slept 2.5 hours a night for several years of my life. I hitchhiked 60 kilometers every day to university. I had no pocket money and mostly didn't have food. I starved all that time, and I kept myself going. I don't have too much sympathy for the soft kids that are crying today. It is very necessary, it's good to put your hours in, and to get handles on the reality of life. We're not going to be innovators and pioneers if we allow ourselves to wallow in self-pity.
Yeah, nobody's going to get anywhere without hard work. Your comments?
I just want to say, I think we need to bring back this whole thing back to the kingdom of God, because we're trying to restore a government and restore a university separate from the kingdom of God. When Jesus came, he did not come against the government. He did not come to establish a new government. He came to establish the kingdom of God. And that's where we need to be. If Jesus comes right now, do I want to be involved in a revolution? Do I want to be involved in fighting against the government? Do I want to be involved in a protest? No, I want to be involved in his work, because ultimately I'm going to be accountable to him first. He's going to tell me, good and faithful servant, not good and a radical servant or whatever, good and faithful. And faithful comes by serving him and serving his word. We're looking at this, I think we're looking at this apart from the word of God, and it's not going to work.
Amen.
Yeah.
So we have to end with that. We have run out of time, unfortunately. I want to thank all of you for participating. All of your inputs and your insights was highly appreciated. For coming out, leaving your campus work and all of that to come and sit on the grass here with us, and especially to Pastor Fred May for helping me set this up, and for his insights and his wisdom. Thank you so much. And maybe we can do this in the near future. We can continue this discussion with the students. But from all of us here at the university campus on Stellenbosch, wish you well, and God bless, and good night.
So Uncle Angus, it is so great to speak to you. We were very inspired by your message now at this Vision Night for the Message Trust.
Right.
There's a lot of challenges we're facing in South Africa.
Absolutely.
But even what's happening on the campuses, politically, with the economy, all of those things. But you gave a very, very powerful message to South Africans that they shouldn't forget.
Absolutely.
And I want you to make that message to our viewers out there and all South Africans, that there's still hope in Jesus Christ.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Errol. It's an honor to be able to share this. Folks, I'm a farmer. We're going through the worst drought in 200 years. Our dams on the farm are still empty. But that doesn't change my hope in Jesus.
Amen.
We see political unrest. We see economic chaos, actually. That doesn't change my hope in Jesus. Jesus promised us in John chapter 16 and verse 33. He says, I've told you these things. In me you'll have peace. In this world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. Take heart, I've overcome the world. Folks, if your faith in Christ is determined on your situation at home, on your situation with the economics or the political situation, you'll never last. There is no place for fair weather Christians. You're either in or you're out. You're either following Jesus or you're not. This country is a Christian country. 90% of the people in this country acknowledge this book. Folks, we've got to be more vocal. We've got to stop talking negative stuff. Some of us are talking so negative that the devil's got no work to do. We need to get our mouths washed out with Holy Ghost soap. We've got some, count your blessings. We live in a country that's unparalleled, a beautiful nation, a rainbow nation. We've heard that. Well, let's start acting like it. Okay, you see, I'm colorblind. I can't see any other color. I see children of God. Like never before, I believe we have an opportunity to see the greatest revival that this world has ever seen up to date. Because without revival, this country's got no hope. But Jesus has promised you, He's promised me He will never leave us and He will never forsake us. Now, I choose to believe what God says about this country and about me and my family and about you. Like never before, we need to make a decision. And the decision is quite simple. Are we going to believe God's promises, or are we going to believe the lies of the devil? If you say you're going to leave this country and you're going to go somewhere else where it's quiet, I want to tell you that trouble will go with you because it's in your heart. You have to settle your heart with God first. Then if God tells you to leave, different story. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Joshua said that in Joshua 24:15. And I'm saying the same thing. And I'm telling you, we're in the front line, just like you, with everything. I'm a family man. I've told my family we will stand, and the gates of hell will not prevail. May God bless you as you continue to stand up for righteousness, because Jesus Christ is Lord of this nation.
Amen.
Thank you.
Uncle Angus, I just want to add my agreement to you with that South Africa will live, South Africa must rise.
Yes.
There is more hope than there is negativity.
Of course.
There's enough people in this country that can pray and turn things around. So
Absolutely.
we bless you. Thank you so much. God
Keep
bless
up
you.
the good work, Errol.
We will.
You're doing a great job, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.